What if I told you that procrastination isn't about lacking willpower, but rather a survival mechanism in your brain that's actually working against you? Marcus Aurelius, Emperor of Rome over 1800 years ago, faced the exact same dilemma you face today when you wake up and stare at that never-ending to-do list. He discovered that the problem wasn't a lack of motivation, it was the way he was conditioning his own mind. The Stoics developed specific daily rituals that completely rewired how the brain handles resistance and discomfort. These same rituals that helped emperors, philosophers, and warriors conquer empires and transform civilizations are available to you right now, and they will obliterate once and for all that vicious cycle keeping you trapped in inaction. We're not talking about shallow productivity hacks or questionable modern techniques, but rather principles tested across centuries that attack the psychological root of procrastination. Subscribe to the channel, leave your like and comment from which part of the world you're watching, get comfortable and relax. Let's begin. You didn't arrive here by accident. Something inside you knows that procrastination has been stealing your time, your potential, your peace. Perhaps you felt it for weeks, months, or even years. That quiet voice reminding you of what you haven't done, what you've delayed, what you've avoided. The weight of unfinished tasks pressing down on your chest, the guilt that arrives each evening when you realize another day has passed and you haven't moved forward. You're tired of it, tired of the excuses, tired of the disappointment, tired of feeling like you're living beneath your true capacity. And you should be tired of it because procrastination isn't just about delaying tasks. It's about delaying your life, your growth, your transformation into who you're meant to become. The ancient Stoics understood something profound about human nature, something that modern productivity gurus often miss. They understood that procrastination isn't a time management problem. It's not about lacking the right app, the perfect planner, or the most efficient system. Procrastination is a philosophical problem. It's a problem of the soul, of the mind, of how you relate to discomfort, to fear, to the present moment. Marcus Aurelius, the emperor who ruled Rome yet still struggled with his own inner battles, wrote in his private journals that we often avoid what we should do most. We create elaborate justifications, beautiful excuses, reasonable sounding explanations for why now isn't the right time, why tomorrow would be better, why we need to wait for the perfect conditions. But here's the truth that the Stoics discovered through their own struggles, through their own moments of weakness and triumph. Procrastination is fundamentally a failure to accept reality as it is. When you procrastinate, you're living in a fantasy. You're imagining a future version of yourself who will somehow feel more motivated, more prepared, more capable. You're rejecting the present moment with all its imperfections and discomforts, waiting for some magical future moment when everything will feel right. But the Stoics knew that this magical moment never comes. There will never be a perfect time. There will never be a moment when fear disappears completely, when doubt vanishes, when everything feels easy and natural. Epictetus, who spent years as a slave before becoming one of the greatest philosophers of his time, taught his students that freedom isn't about changing your external circumstances. It's about changing your relationship with those circumstances. And procrastination, he would say, is one of the greatest forms of slavery. When you procrastinate, you become a slave to your emotions, to your momentary discomforts, to your fears. You give away your power to decide, to act, to shape your life. You wait for permission from your feelings, forgetting that feelings are just weather patterns in your mind, constantly changing, never stable enough to be a reliable guide for action. Tonight, or today, or right now in this moment, you're going to learn 9 rituals that will transform your relationship with action. These aren't tricks or hacks. They're not quick fixes that will stop working after a week. These are ancient practices, refined over centuries, tested by men and women who faced wars, poverty, betrayal, loss, and still managed to act with purpose and discipline. These rituals work because they address the root cause of procrastination. They work because they change not just what you do, but who you are. They work because they're based on timeless truths about human nature, about the mind, about what actually creates lasting change. Before we begin, understand this. These 9 rituals will require something from you. They will require honesty, the kind of brutal honesty that looks at your excuses without judgment, but also without acceptance. They will require practice because no one masters these rituals overnight. They will require patience with yourself because you will fail, you will forget, you will fall back into old patterns, but they will also give you something invaluable. They will give you back your time, your agency, your sense of being someone who does what they say they'll do. They will give you the deep satisfaction that comes from living in alignment with your values, from going to bed each night knowing you showed up for yourself, knowing you didn't hide from what matters. The first thing you need to understand about procrastination is that it's not your enemy. This might sound strange, contradictory even, but bear with me. Procrastination is actually a messenger. It's trying to tell you something important about how you're relating to your life. Most people treat procrastination like a character flaw, something shameful, something that proves they're lazy or broken or lacking in willpower. But the Stoics would see it differently. They would see procrastination as a symptom, not the disease itself. The disease is much deeper. It's in how you think about discomfort, how you relate to uncertainty, how you measure your worth, how you define what's truly important. Think about when you procrastinate most. It's usually not with things you find genuinely enjoyable or easy. You don't procrastinate on scrolling through social media, watching your favorite show, eating foods you love. You procrastinate on the things that matter most, the things that will actually move your life forward. You procrastinate on the work project that could advance your career. You procrastinate on the difficult conversation that could heal a relationship. You procrastinate on starting that creative project you've been dreaming about for years. You procrastinate on taking care of your health, your finances, your future. Why? Because these things require you to face discomfort. They require you to risk failure, to be seen, to be judged, to discover that maybe you're not as good at something as you hoped you'd be. This is where the Stoic wisdom becomes revolutionary. The Stoics didn't try to eliminate discomfort. They didn't seek a life of ease and pleasure. They understood that discomfort is the price of growth, the cost of any meaningful achievement. Marcus Aurelius wrote that the obstacle is the way, meaning that the very thing you want to avoid, the discomfort you're running from, is actually the path forward. When you procrastinate, you're essentially telling yourself a lie. You're telling yourself that you need to feel ready before you act. You're telling yourself that motivation should come before movement. But the Stoics knew the reverse is true. Action creates motivation, not the other way around. Seneca, the wealthy Roman who counseled emperors, yet lived with the discipline of a monk, observed that we waste so much time waiting for life to begin. We tell ourselves we'll start living fully once we finish school, once we get the right job, once we find the right partner, once we have more money, more time, more security. But life is happening now. Every moment you spend waiting is a moment you'll never get back. Every day you postpone what matters is a day lost forever. This isn't meant to create panic or stress. It's meant to create urgency, the kind of urgency that cuts through excuses and games and self-deception. The 9 rituals you're about to learn are designed to be practiced daily. Some take just a few minutes, others will become woven into the fabric of how you approach your entire day. They're not meant to be perfect. You don't need to do all 9 every single day, especially at first. You're not aiming for perfection. You're aiming for progress, for consistency over intensity, for small changes that compound over time into a completely transformed relationship with action. The Stoics believed in gradual improvement, in becoming slightly better each day. They believed that small disciplines, practiced consistently, create remarkable results over time. As you read through these rituals, you might feel resistance. Your mind might offer reasons why these won't work for you, why your situation is different, why you need something else first. Notice that resistance. Don't fight it, but don't obey it either. That resistance is just fear wearing a mask of reason. It's the same force that's been keeping you stuck, keeping you small, keeping you from the life you're capable of living. The beautiful thing about these Stoic rituals is that they don't require you to overcome your fear before you begin. They don't require you to feel motivated or inspired. They work precisely because they help you act in spite of fear, in spite of resistance, in spite of not feeling ready. Each ritual builds on the others, creating a complete system for relating to your time, your tasks, your life in a fundamentally different way. By the end, you'll have a practical framework that you can return to whenever procrastination starts to creep back in, because it will creep back. That's not failure, that's being human. The goal isn't to never procrastinate again. The goal is to have tools, practices, rituals that help you catch yourself quickly, redirect your energy, and return to aligned action. The Stoics didn't expect themselves to be perfect. They expected themselves to be aware, honest, and willing to course correct. So take a breath. Let go of the guilt about all the time you've already lost to procrastination. Let go of the shame about unfinished projects, missed opportunities, broken promises to yourself. All of that is in the past. And the past no longer exists except as memory. What exists is now, this moment. this opportunity to choose differently. The Stoics would tell you that every moment is a chance to begin again, to recommit to who you want to be, to take one small step in the direction of your values. You don't need to change everything at once. You just need to be willing to try something different, to approach your relationship with action from a new angle. These 9 rituals come from wisdom tested across centuries, practiced by slaves and emperors, philosophers and soldiers, people who had every excuse to give up yet chose to keep going. They're being offered to you now, not as rigid rules, but as flexible principles, guidelines you can adapt to your own life, your own struggles, your own dreams. Some will resonate immediately. Others might make more sense after you've practiced for a while. Trust the process. Trust that even when you don't see immediate results, something is shifting beneath the surface. Your relationship with procrastination didn't develop overnight, and it won't transform overnight, but it will transform day by day, choice by choice, ritual by ritual. The first ritual begins before you even get out of bed. It begins in those first moments of consciousness, when your mind is still soft and malleable, before the demands of the day have fully crashed over you. This is the ritual of morning reflection and intention setting, and the Stoics considered it sacred. Marcus Aurelius practiced it every single morning, even when he was exhausted from military campaigns, even when he would have preferred to stay in the comfort of sleep. He would take a few moments to prepare his mind for the day ahead, to remember what was truly important, to set his intention for how he wanted to show up in the world. The modern world wants you to begin your day reactively. Your phone buzzes with notifications, pulling you immediately into other people's agendas, other people's emergencies, other people's definitions of what's urgent. Before you've even had a chance to remember who you are and what you care about, you're already responding, reacting, being swept along by the current of external demands. This is one of the primary fuel sources for procrastination. When you start your day without intention, without clarity, without reconnecting to your purpose, you create the perfect conditions for avoiding what matters most. You fill your time with busy work, with distractions that feel productive but don't actually move you toward your goals. The morning reflection ritual is elegantly simple, but simple doesn't mean easy. It requires discipline to pause when your impulse is to rush forward, to reflect when your habit is to react. Here's how it works. Before you check your phone, before you engage with any external input, you take 5 minutes to sit with 3 questions. Just 3 questions, but these 3 questions have the power to completely reshape your day. The first question is this: what difficult thing am I avoiding today, and why? Notice the honesty this question demands. It's not asking what you have to do today. It's asking what you're avoiding, and there's always something. Some conversation you need to have, some task you've been putting off, some decision you've been delaying. Name it specifically. Don't let yourself off the hook with vague generalities. When you name what you're avoiding, you also need to name why you're avoiding it. This is where the real insight comes. Most of the time, you'll discover that you're avoiding something not because it's actually that difficult, but because it triggers some fear. Fear of failure, fear of judgment, fear of discovering you're not as capable as you'd like to believe, fear of success and the changes that might bring, fear of discomfort, of boredom, of facing yourself without distraction. The Stoics believe that naming your fears diminishes their power over you. When fear remains nameless and unconscious, it controls you from the shadows. But when you pull it into the light, when you look at it directly and say, I'm avoiding this because I'm afraid people will criticize me, or I'm avoiding this because I'm afraid I'll fail, something shifts. The fear doesn't disappear, but it stops having ultimate authority over your actions. The second question for your morning reflection is this: if I could only accomplish one thing today, what would matter most? This question cuts through the illusion that you need to do everything. You don't. You can't. The Stoics were masters at distinguishing between what's essential and what's merely urgent or appealing. Seneca wrote extensively about how we waste our lives on trivialities while claiming we don't have time for what truly matters. This question forces you to identify the one thing that, if you did it, would make today feel meaningful and aligned with who you want to be, not what would make you feel busy or productive in some superficial sense. What would actually move your life forward in a significant way. This isn't always a big thing. Sometimes the most important thing you could do today is have a difficult conversation with someone you love. Sometimes it's working on a creative project for an hour without distraction. Sometimes it's taking care of your body, resting, recovering. The key is that it's chosen consciously, with full awareness of what you're prioritizing and why. When you identify this one essential thing, you create a North Star for your day. Everything else can orbit around it, but this one thing gets protected time, protected energy, protected attention. This is how you begin to break the pattern of procrastination. You stop trying to do everything and instead focus on doing what matters most. The third question is this: what would the person I'm becoming do today? This is a question about identity, about who you're transforming into through your daily choices. The Stoics understood that we're not fixed entities, we're constantly in the process of becoming, and every action either moves us toward the person we want to be or away from that person. When you procrastinate, you're acting from your current identity, your current habits, your current comfort zone. But when you ask what the person you're becoming would do, you're inviting a different version of yourself to guide your choices. That future version of you, the one who has already overcome procrastination, who acts with discipline and purpose, what would they do today? How would they approach this difficult task? How would they respond to the urge to avoid or delay? This question isn't about creating some perfect, idealized version of yourself that you can never measure up to. It's about clarifying the direction of your growth and then taking small steps in that direction. The person you're becoming might be someone who writes every morning, who exercises consistently, who has difficult conversations instead of avoiding them, who takes creative risks, who keeps their promises to themselves. When you connect with that identity in the morning, even briefly, you give yourself permission to make choices aligned with that identity throughout the day. You remind yourself that you're not stuck being who you've always been. You're in the process of transformation. These 3 questions shouldn't take long. 5 minutes is enough. But those 5 minutes, practiced consistently, create a foundation that everything else builds on. You're training your mind to start each day with clarity instead of reactivity, with intention instead of anxiety, with honesty instead of self-deception. You're also creating a buffer between sleep and the demands of the world, a space where you remember what's truly important before the urgent tries to drown out the essential. The Stoics called this kind of practice a morning meditation, though they didn't mean sitting in lotus position chanting mantras. They meant taking time to align your mind with your values before you engage with the world. You might resist this ritual, your mind might say you don't have time, that 5 minutes will make you late, that you can do this mental work while you're in the shower or during your commute. But the Stoics would challenge that resistance. If you don't have 5 minutes for yourself, for clarity, for intention, then you don't have your life. You're living reactively, bouncing from one demand to another, never pausing to ask if this is how you actually want to spend your limited time on Earth. The morning reflection ritual isn't about adding more to your already full plate. It's about creating space to see clearly what should actually be on your plate in the first place. As you practice this ritual, you'll notice something interesting. The things you identify as important in the morning, the things you're avoiding, they start to have more pull on you throughout the day. You've brought them into conscious awareness. You've named them. They're harder to ignore. This is intentional. One of procrastination's favorite tricks is to keep you so busy with distractions that you can pretend you just forgot about the important things. But when you've explicitly named what matters most and what you're avoiding at the start of each day, forgetting becomes much harder. You have to be more honest with yourself about the choice you're making when you scroll through social media instead of working on your important project. You're not just passing time anymore, you're actively choosing distraction over what you've already identified as meaningful. This increased awareness is sometimes uncomfortable at first. It's easier to procrastinate unconsciously, to drift through your days without really acknowledging the gap between how you're living and how you want to live. But the Stoics believed that discomfort in service of truth is far better than comfort built on self-deception. Yes, it might feel uncomfortable to clearly see how you're avoiding what matters, but that discomfort is productive. It's the discomfort that precedes change, that creates the motivation to actually do something different. Without that clarity, without that honest acknowledgement, you can procrastinate for years while telling yourself you're just waiting for the right time, the right resources, the right feeling. The morning reflection ritual also helps you build what the Stoics called prosoche, which translates roughly to attention or mindfulness. It's the quality of being awake to the present moment, aware of your thoughts and choices, rather than moving through life on autopilot. Procrastination thrives on autopilot. When you're not paying attention, you default to whatever's easiest, most comfortable, most habitual. But when you cultivate prosoche, when you start your day with deliberate attention to what matters, you create the conditions for intentional action. You give yourself a fighting chance against the gravitational pull of distraction and avoidance. The second ritual is practiced throughout your day, whenever you feel the familiar pull of procrastination starting to take hold. This is the ritual of the dichotomy of control, and it might be the single most powerful tool the Stoics offer for overcoming procrastination. Epictetus taught this principle relentlessly to his students, hammering it home until it became second nature. The dichotomy of control is simple to understand but profound in its implications. Some things are up to you, and some things are not up to you. Your freedom, your peace, your ability to act all depend on clearly distinguishing between these two categories, and then focusing your energy only on what's actually within your control. How does this relate to procrastination? More than you might initially think. Most procrastination is fueled by focusing on things outside your control. You don't start writing because you're worried the writing won't be good enough, that people will criticize it, that it won't be successful. You don't have the difficult conversation because you can't control how the other person will respond. You don't start the project because you can't guarantee it will turn out the way you envision. You don't take the risk because you can't control the outcome. Notice the pattern? You're freezing yourself with concerns about things that aren't actually in your power. The quality of your first draft, other people's opinions, whether your project succeeds, how someone responds to what you say, none of these things are within your control. Here's what is within your control. Whether you sit down and write, even badly. Whether you speak your truth honestly and respectfully, regardless of how it's received. Whether you work on your project with full effort, regardless of the outcome. Whether you take the action that aligns with your values, regardless of whether it's comfortable. The Stoics discovered that when you shift your focus from outcomes you can't control to actions you can control, procrastination loses most of its power, because procrastination depends on you fixating on all the things that could go wrong, all the ways you might fail, all the outcomes you can't guarantee. But when you narrow your focus to just the next action you can take, right now, with what you have, procrastination has nowhere to hide. The ritual works like this. When you notice yourself avoiding something, when you feel that familiar heaviness that says maybe later, maybe tomorrow, you pause. You don't fight the feeling. You don't shame yourself for it. You just pause and ask yourself a simple question. What part of this is actually within my control right now? Not later, not eventually, but right now, in this present moment. Usually the answer is quite small. You can control whether you open the document, whether you make the phone call, whether you put on your workout clothes, whether you sit at your desk. You can't control whether the work will be brilliant, whether the call will go well, whether the workout will feel good, whether you'll be productive once you sit down, but you can control the simple action of beginning. This is where the ritual becomes powerful. Once you've identified what's actually in your control, the Stoics would say you have a moral obligation to do that thing. Not eventually, not when you feel ready, but now. Because to delay what's in your power, to procrastinate on what you're actually capable of doing right now, is to betray yourself. It's to live beneath your capacity. It's to let fear of things you can't control stop you from exercising the power you do have. Marcus Aurelius wrote that we have power over our actions in this moment, and that's enough. We don't need power over outcomes, over other people's reactions, over whether things turn out as we hope. We just need to exercise the power we actually have, which is the power to act with virtue, with courage, with discipline right now. When you practice this ritual consistently, something remarkable happens. You start to see how much energy you've been wasting on things outside your control. You start to notice how your mind constantly jumps ahead to outcomes, to judgments, to things that haven't happened yet and might never happen, and you start to bring yourself back again and again to the simple present moment action that's available to you. This isn't just about productivity. It's about reclaiming your agency, your sense of being someone who acts rather than someone who's acted upon. Every time you identify what's in your control and then do that thing, even in some small way, you strengthen a different part of yourself. You strengthen the part that doesn't need perfect conditions or guaranteed outcomes. You strengthen the part that can act in the face of uncertainty. Let's be concrete about how this works with common procrastination scenarios. Say you've been avoiding starting a creative project because you're worried it won't be original enough, that someone else has already done something similar, that you don't have anything new to offer. These are all concerns about things outside your control. You can't control whether your work will be completely original. You can't control what others have created or will create. You can't control whether the world will see your offering as new or valuable. But here's what you can control. You can sit down for 20 minutes and create something, anything. You can put words on a page or paint on a canvas or sounds in a sequence. That action that's showing up, that's entirely within your power. The dichotomy of control ritual says to release your grip on all those uncontrollable outcomes and simply exercise the power you actually have. Or say you've been procrastinating on a difficult conversation with someone you care about. You're worried about how they'll react, whether they'll get angry or defensive, whether the conversation will make things worse instead of better, whether you'll say the wrong thing. Again, none of those concerns are within your control. You cannot control another person's emotional reactions. You cannot guarantee that a conversation will go well. You cannot control whether your words come out perfectly, but you can control whether you show up for the conversation. You can control whether you speak honestly and with good intent. You can control whether you listen with genuine openness. You can control whether you act from courage rather than avoidance. When you focus only on those things, the procrastination often dissolves because you're no longer trying to control the uncontrollable. You're simply committing to doing your part. The Stoics would remind you that focusing on what you can't control isn't just unproductive, it's a form of arrogance. It's assuming you should be able to determine outcomes that are actually the product of countless factors beyond your influence. When you procrastinate because you can't guarantee success, you're essentially saying that you should only act when you have godlike control over reality. But you're not a god. You're a human with limited power, limited knowledge, limited control. And that's okay. That's not a problem to be solved. It's a reality to be accepted. Once you accept it, once you truly internalize that your power is limited to your own thoughts and actions in the present moment, a strange kind of freedom emerges. You no longer need the stars to align. You no longer need to feel ready. You no longer need to wait for perfect conditions. You simply need to do what's yours to do and let go of the rest. This ritual also helps with one of procrastination's sneakiest forms, which is productive procrastination. This is when you avoid what's truly important by doing other things that feel productive, but are actually just easier, more comfortable versions of real work. You clean your workspace instead of writing. You do research for hours instead of actually creating. You answer emails instead of having the difficult conversation. You organize your files instead of starting the project. The dichotomy of control cuts through this kind of self-deception, because when you honestly ask what's within your control and what's most important, you can't hide behind these substitute activities. Yes, it's within your control to clean your desk, but is that what matters most right now? Or are you cleaning your desk because it gives you the feeling of doing something while allowing you to avoid the discomfort of the real work? The practice here is to be ruthlessly honest with yourself. The Stoics valued truth above comfort. They believed that self-deception, even comforting self-deception, was a kind of slavery. When you lie to yourself about what you're doing and why, you give up your freedom. You become a puppet of your fears and avoidances, pulled this way and that by whatever's most comfortable in the moment. But when you practice the dichotomy of control, when you consistently ask yourself what's actually in my power right now and what actually matters most, you start to see through your own tricks. You start to catch yourself in the act of avoiding. And that awareness, that clarity, that's the first step toward choosing differently. As you practice this ritual throughout your day, you might notice resistance. Your mind might want to argue about what is and isn't in your control. It might want to convince you that outcomes are at least partially in your control, so you should wait until conditions are more favorable before acting. This is where the Stoic distinction becomes crucial. Yes, your actions can influence outcomes, but influence is not the same as control. You can do everything right and still fail. You can give your best effort and still be rejected. You can create something beautiful and still be criticized. The outcomes are always ultimately outside your direct control because they depend on factors beyond you. Your actions, your effort, your virtue, your courage in this moment, these are the only things you truly control. And the Stoics would say these are the only things that matter. The third ritual addresses one of the deepest roots of procrastination, which is the tendency to see tasks as overwhelming monoliths rather than as sequences of present moments. This is the ritual of breaking tasks into present moments, and it's based on a profound Stoic insight about the nature of time. We don't actually live in the future or the past, we only ever live in now. And yet most procrastination happens because we're mentally living in an imagined future, looking at everything we have to do and feeling crushed by the weight of it. The Stoics, especially Marcus Aurelius, taught that this is a kind of madness. You're torturing yourself with a future that doesn't exist yet and might never exist. You're abandoning the only moment you actually have, which is this one. The ritual is simple but requires practice to master. Whenever you're facing a task that feels overwhelming, something you've been putting off because it seems too big, too complex, too demanding, you break it down not into steps or subtasks, but into present moments. You ask yourself, what is the smallest, most immediate action I can take right now in this single present moment that would move this forward? Not, what do I need to do today? Not what's my plan for completing this, but what's the tiniest next step I can take in the next 5 minutes, the next 60 seconds, the next moment. This reframing is crucial because procrastination thrives on big picture thinking. When you look at a project as a whole, it's easy to feel overwhelmed. Where do you even start? How will you ever finish? Do you have what it takes? These questions paralyze you because they're about a future that hasn't happened yet. But when you narrow your focus to just the next moment, just the immediate action available to you right now, something shifts. Because in this present moment, you're not trying to write a whole book, you're just opening a document. You're not trying to get in perfect shape, you're just putting on your shoes. You're not trying to transform your career. You're just sending one email, making one call, researching one opportunity. The Stoics understood that all great accomplishments are built from small moments strung together. Marcus Aurelius, despite ruling an empire and fighting wars and writing profound philosophy, never let himself think about everything he had to do in some vast, overwhelming sense. He focused on what was required of him in each present moment. What do I need to do right now? What's the next right action? This moment, nothing else. This ritual works because it bypasses one of procrastination's main weapons, which is the feeling that you need to see the whole path before you take the first step. You tell yourself you can't start until you have a complete plan, until you know how everything will unfold, until you can see from here to the finish line. But life doesn't work that way. You can't see the whole path. You never could. The Stoics accepted this fundamental uncertainty as part of the human condition. You have to act without knowing how things will turn out. You have to take steps into the unknown, and the way you do that without becoming paralyzed is by focusing only on the step you're taking right now, not the 100 steps that might come after. Let me give you a concrete example of how this works. Say you've been procrastinating on organizing your finances, something many people avoid because it feels overwhelming. When you think about organizing your finances as a whole project, your mind immediately goes to everything involved. You'll need to gather documents, review statements, create a budget, maybe deal with debt, think about investments, plan for the future. It's exhausting just thinking about it, so you don't start. You tell yourself you'll do it when you have a whole day free, when you're in the right mindset, when you've figured out your approach. Meanwhile, months pass and nothing changes. Now apply the ritual of present moments. You don't think about organizing your finances. You think about the next 60 seconds. In the next 60 seconds, what's one tiny action you could take? You could open one bank statement, that's it. Not review all your statements, not create a comprehensive financial plan, just open one statement and look at it. That's a present moment action. When you've done that, you ask again, what's the next tiny action? Maybe you write down one number, one piece of information, then another, then another. Each action takes only a moment. Each action is completely doable. You're not trying to fix your finances in one sitting. You're just taking the next small step, then the next, then the next. Before you know it, you've made real progress. Not because you conquered your procrastination through some massive burst of willpower, but because you stopped trying to live in the future and started acting in the present. The Stoics practiced this constantly. Seneca wrote about how we should approach each day, even each hour, as its own complete unit. Don't let your mind race ahead to all the hours and days to come. Don't burden this moment with the weight of all your future moments. Just be here. Just do what this moment calls for, and trust that when the next moment comes, you'll handle that too. This isn't about denying that you have future responsibilities. It's about recognizing that you can't actually do anything in the future. You can only act now. And when you focus all your energy on acting well in this present moment, the future takes care of itself. Not in some magical way, but in a very practical way. Because a series of present moments handled well creates a good hour. A series of good hours creates a good day. A series of good days creates a good life. This ritual also helps with the perfectionism that often fuels procrastination. When you're focused on the final product, on some perfect vision of what you want to create or achieve, you can become paralyzed by the gap between that vision and your current capability. You don't start because what you'll produce now won't match what you imagine. But when you focus only on the present moment, perfectionism loses its grip, because you're not trying to create something perfect, you're just taking the next step. That's all. This step doesn't need to be perfect, it just needs to be taken. The Stoics understood that excellence isn't about perfection, it's about consistent effort, about showing up repeatedly, about doing what's yours to do in each moment, without demanding that every moment be extraordinary. As you practice this ritual, you'll start to notice how much of your mental energy you've been spending on the future. You'll catch yourself thinking about how much you have to do, how long something will take, whether you'll be able to finish, what obstacles might arise. And each time you notice this, you'll practice bringing yourself back, not to some future moment, but to this moment. What's available to me right now? What's the smallest next step? This practice of returning to the present over and over is like a muscle you're strengthening. At first, it's hard. Your mind wants to jump ahead, to worry, to plan, to imagine. But with practice, it becomes easier to anchor yourself in now, to focus your full attention on the immediate action in front of you. The Stoics would also remind you that this present moment is all you're guaranteed. You might not have tomorrow, you might not have next week. The future is never certain. But this moment is yours. This is where your power lives. This is where your life actually happens. When you procrastinate, you're essentially betting that you'll have more time later, that future you will somehow be more capable or motivated or ready. But that's a bet you might lose. Not to be morbid, but to be realistic. The Stoics practiced memento mori, remembering death, precisely to create urgency about acting in the present. If this moment is all you have, if you're not guaranteed tomorrow, does it make sense to waste this moment waiting for some better moment that might never come? This ritual transforms not just your relationship with procrastination, but your entire experience of time. When you're constantly living in the future, time feels scarce and oppressive. There's never enough. You're always behind. But when you bring yourself into the present, when you focus only on this moment and what's possible right now, time opens up, because this moment is enough. This moment is complete. You're not trying to somehow be in multiple moments at once. You're here, fully, doing what's yours to do. There's something deeply peaceful about that, even when what you're doing is difficult or uncomfortable. The peace comes from alignment, from being fully present to your life as it's actually happening rather than constantly living in some imagined future. The practice is to return to this question throughout your day. What's the next present moment action? Not the grand strategy, not the master plan, just the next small step. Open the email, read one paragraph, write one sentence, do one rep, make one decision. Each moment, each tiny action becomes a practice of being here now, of exercising your power where it actually exists. And when you string together enough of these present moment actions, you discover something remarkable. You've accomplished things you used to procrastinate on endlessly, not through some heroic burst of motivation, but through the simple practice of being present and taking the next small step again and again and again. The fourth ritual is perhaps the most confronting and yet potentially the most liberating of all the Stoic practices for overcoming procrastination. This is the ritual of memento mori, which translates as "remember you must die." Before you dismiss this as morbid or depressing, understand what the Stoics were actually doing with this practice. They weren't dwelling on death in some nihilistic way. They were using the awareness of death to create clarity about life, about what actually matters, about what deserves your limited time and energy. Marcus Aurelius reminded himself daily that he was mortal, that his time was finite, that one day he would no longer have the opportunity to act, to love, to contribute, to grow. He did this not to make himself miserable, but to cut through all the trivial concerns and excuses that cloud our judgment. Procrastination becomes almost impossible when you truly internalize your mortality. When you really understand, not just intellectually but in your bones, that you have a finite number of days, hours, moments left, suddenly wasting time becomes unconscionable. Suddenly, putting off what matters starts to feel like a betrayal of the gift of life itself. The problem is that most of us live as though we have unlimited time. We act as though there will always be tomorrow, always another chance, always more opportunities. We tell ourselves we'll start that project next month, have that conversation next week, make that change next year. But the Stoics knew the truth that we work very hard to avoid. Your time is running out. Right now, as you read these words, you're using up moments you'll never get back. The question is whether you're using them consciously, purposefully, or whether you're squandering them on avoidance and distraction. The memento mori ritual is practiced daily, ideally in the morning as part of your reflection time. You take a few moments to remember that today might be your last day. Not in a fearful way, not dwelling on how you might die, but simply acknowledging the reality that nothing is guaranteed. You don't know if you'll wake up tomorrow. You don't know if you'll have another year, another decade, another hour. This is just truth. This is reality. And when you let that reality touch you, when you let it inform your choices, it changes everything. Suddenly, the email you were avoiding sending doesn't seem like such a big deal. The difficult task you were putting off becomes something you want to do now, while you still can. The conversation you were delaying becomes urgent because what if you never get another chance? Seneca wrote extensively about how we waste our lives. He observed that people act as though they're immortal, as though they have infinite time to pursue what matters. They're careless with their hours, generous with their attention to trivialities, stingy with their commitment to what they claim to value. And then they reach old age and suddenly realize with horror how much time they wasted, how many opportunities they let slip by, how many things they meant to do but never got around to. Seneca's solution was to live with death always in your peripheral vision, not as something scary, but as something clarifying. When you remember you're going to die, you stop tolerating your own excuses. You stop accepting procrastination as just part of who you are. You start to feel a healthy urgency about acting on what matters. Here's how to practice this ritual in a way that's empowering rather than depressing. Each morning, after your reflection questions, you say to yourself either aloud or silently, I might not have tomorrow. This day that's beginning right now might be my last day to act, to love, to contribute, to become who I'm meant to be. What will I do with it? How will I use these precious hours? When I lie down tonight, what do I want to be able to look back on? You don't linger in the morbid details. You don't imagine your death in graphic ways. You simply acknowledge the truth of impermanence and let that truth inform your intentions for the day. Then you ask yourself, given that my time is finite, is scrolling through social media for an hour really how I want to spend it? Is avoiding that difficult conversation really worth the cost of never having it at all? Is putting off my dreams really a wise choice when I don't know how many chances I'll have? The Stoics found that this practice created what they called urgency without anxiety. Many people avoid thinking about death because they think it will make them anxious or depressed. But the Stoics discovered the opposite. When you truly accept your mortality, when you stop pretending you have unlimited time, you actually become calmer because you stop wasting energy on things that don't matter. You stop getting caught up in petty concerns and trivial dramas. You stop procrastinating on what's important because you recognize you might not get another chance. This creates a kind of focused calm, a sense of purpose that cuts through confusion and ambivalence. You know what matters. You know your time is limited, so you act. There's a famous Stoic exercise called the evening review, which pairs beautifully with memento mori. Each night before sleep, you review your day with the awareness that it might have been your last day. You ask yourself, if I had died tonight, would I be satisfied with how I spent today? Did I act with virtue? Did I do what mattered? Did I show up for the people I love? Did I move toward who I want to become? Or did I waste the day on avoidance and distraction? This isn't about judging yourself harshly, it's about honest assessment. If the answer is that you're not satisfied with how you spent the day, you don't wallow in guilt. You simply note it and commit to choosing differently tomorrow. And you do so with added urgency, because tomorrow isn't guaranteed. When you practice memento mori consistently, you start to develop what the Stoics called an attitude of amor fati, love of fate. You begin to accept that life is short, that death comes for everyone, that your time is limited. And instead of finding this depressing, you find it liberating. Because if you're going to die anyway, if all of this is temporary, then what's the point of playing it safe? What's the point of living small, of letting fear run your life, of putting off what matters? You might as well go for it. You might as well take the risks, have the conversations, do the work, create the things, love the people. You might as well live fully while you can, because someday you won't be able to. This ritual is especially powerful when you're procrastinating out of fear. Fear of failure, fear of judgment, fear of looking foolish. When you remember that you're mortal, that everyone who might judge you is also mortal, that all of this is temporary and fleeting, the fears start to lose their power. So what if you fail? You're going to die anyway. So what if someone criticizes you? You're both going to be dead someday, and none of this will matter. This isn't nihilistic, it's liberating. It frees you to act, to try, to risk, to live, because you recognize that the alternative, playing it safe and never really living, is actually worse than any failure or criticism you might face. The Stoics also used memento mori to combat one of procrastination's favorite lies, which is that you'll feel more ready later. You tell yourself you'll start when you have more experience, more resources, more confidence. But the Stoics would ask, what if later never comes? What if you die before you feel ready? Would you be okay with never having tried? This question cuts through the excuse-making. Because when you face it honestly, you realize that you'd rather try and fail than die without ever having tried at all. You'd rather be imperfect and in the arena than perfect and on the sidelines. And once you recognize that, once you really feel it, procrastination becomes much harder to justify. There's a beautiful paradox in this practice. Thinking about death regularly actually makes you more alive. It makes you more present, more engaged, more willing to act, because you're no longer taking your time for granted. You're no longer assuming you'll have infinite chances to do what matters. You're treating each day as the gift it is, as precious and finite and worth using well. This doesn't mean you become manic or stressed, trying to cram everything into every moment. It means you become more intentional, more focused on what truly matters, more willing to let go of the trivial, and more courageous about pursuing what's essential. As you practice memento mori, be gentle with yourself. This practice can bring up emotions, can make you confront regrets about time you've wasted, can create feelings of urgency that might be uncomfortable at first. That's okay, that's actually the practice working. You're waking up to the reality of your situation. You're seeing clearly what you've been avoiding seeing, and while that might be uncomfortable, it's also the beginning of change, because you can't change what you refuse to see. You can't live differently until you acknowledge how you've been living. The awareness that memento mori creates is a gift, even when it's uncomfortable. It's the awareness that makes different choices possible. The fifth ritual is practiced in the evening, creating a bookend with your morning reflection. This is the ritual of evening review and honest assessment, and it's one of the most powerful tools the Stoics used for continuous self-improvement. Seneca wrote to his friend about doing this every single night, examining his day with unflinching honesty, noting where he acted with virtue and where he fell short, not to punish himself but to learn and grow. This practice is essential for overcoming procrastination because it creates accountability and awareness. You're not letting your days blur together, not letting procrastination become an unconscious habit that you never examine. Instead, you're bringing conscious attention to your patterns, your choices, your successes, and failures. The evening review ritual is structured around 3 questions, asked in sequence after your day is done, but before you fully give yourself over to rest or entertainment. The first question is, what did I accomplish today that mattered? Notice, this isn't asking what you did, it's asking what mattered. You might have been busy all day but accomplished nothing of real importance, or you might have done just one significant thing and spent the rest of the day on trivialities. This question forces you to distinguish between activity and accomplishment, between being busy and being effective. The Stoics were very concerned with this distinction. They saw how easy it is to fill your time with tasks that feel productive but don't actually move your life forward. This question helps you see clearly whether you spent your day on what matters or on what merely seems urgent. When you answer this question honestly, you might find that many days you can't point to anything significant. You were busy, yes. You did things, yes. But nothing that really mattered, nothing that advanced your most important goals or aligned with your deepest values. This realization, while initially uncomfortable, is incredibly valuable because you can't change what you don't acknowledge. If you never stop to assess whether your days are meaningful, you can waste years without fully realizing it. But when you ask this question every evening, when you face the truth of how you're spending your time, you create the possibility of choosing differently tomorrow. The second question is, where did I procrastinate today, and what was I avoiding? This is where the rubber meets the road. You're not just generally reflecting on your day, you're specifically looking at where you avoided what mattered, where you chose comfort over growth, where you let fear or resistance win. And you're going deeper, asking what you were actually avoiding. Because procrastination is never really about the task, it's about what the task represents, what it might trigger in you. Were you avoiding the possibility of failure, the discomfort of not knowing, the vulnerability of being seen, the fear of discovering you're not as good at something as you'd hoped? Name it specifically. The Stoics believed that vague self-awareness is almost useless. You need precise understanding of your patterns if you want to change them. This part of the ritual requires courage because you have to be honest with yourself in a way that might be unflattering. You have to admit where you fell short, where you made excuses, where you chose the easy path instead of the right path. But the Stoics would remind you that this honesty is the foundation of growth. Epictetus taught that you can't improve what you won't acknowledge. If you defend your procrastination, justify justify it, explain it away, you'll stay stuck in it. But if you can look at it clearly and say, yes, I avoided that important conversation because I was afraid of conflict, or yes, I scrolled through social media instead of working because I was afraid my work wouldn't be good enough, then you're starting from truth, and truth is the only solid ground on which to build change. The third question is, what will I do differently tomorrow? This is crucial because the evening review isn't just about looking backward, it's about using what you've learned to move forward more intentionally. Based on your honest assessment of today, what specific action will you take tomorrow? And it needs to be specific, not some vague intention to do better or try harder. The Stoics were very practical. They knew that abstract commitments rarely lead to changed behavior, but specific commitments, concrete actions, these create real change. So instead of saying tomorrow I'll procrastinate less, you say tomorrow I'll work on my project first thing in the morning for 30 minutes before checking email. Instead of saying tomorrow I'll be braver, you say tomorrow I'll initiate that difficult conversation I've been avoiding. This 3-question structure creates a cycle of continuous improvement. You assess honestly, you learn from your assessment, you commit to specific change, and then you assess again the next evening to see if you followed through. Over time, this creates powerful momentum. You start to see patterns in your procrastination. You notice that you always avoid certain types of tasks, or that you procrastinate more at certain times of day or in certain emotional states. These insights allow you to plan more effectively, to set up your environment and schedule in ways that support action rather than avoidance. The evening review also serves another crucial function. It creates a sense of completion for your day. One of the subtle ways procrastination maintains its grip is by making you feel like your day is never really done. There's always something more you should be doing, always something hanging over your head. This creates a kind of chronic stress that makes it hard to truly rest, and when you can't rest deeply, you don't have the energy to tackle difficult tasks the next day. It's a vicious cycle. But when you practice the evening review, you're drawing a clear line. The day is over. You've assessed it honestly. You've learned what there is to learn. You've committed to tomorrow's action. Now you can rest without guilt, without that nagging feeling that you should be doing something else. The Stoics understood that rest isn't optional, it's not a luxury, it's essential for maintaining the strength and clarity you need to act with discipline. Seneca wrote about the importance of renewal, of giving yourself time to recover and restore, but he also knew that rest feels unsatisfying when you haven't really done anything worth resting from. When you've spent the day avoiding what matters, rest feels like just more avoidance. But when you've engaged with what's important, when you've faced what you were afraid to face, even if imperfectly, then rest feels earned. It feels good, and that good rest prepares you to show up again tomorrow. As you practice this evening ritual, you might notice resistance similar to what you felt with the morning practice. Your mind might want to skip it, might tell you you're too tired, that you can think about this stuff later, that it doesn't really matter. But the Stoics would say this resistance is precisely why the practice is necessary. The part of you that wants to avoid honest self-assessment is the same part that fuels your procrastination. It's the part that wants to stay comfortable, that doesn't want to face uncomfortable truths, that would rather remain unconscious than become aware. By practicing the evening review consistently, you're training yourself to override that resistance, to choose awareness over comfort, to be someone who looks honestly at their life, even when it's not easy. One practical tip for making this ritual sustainable is to keep it brief. You're not writing a dissertation on your day. You're spending 5 or 10 minutes with these 3 questions, giving honest answers and then moving on. The Stoics were busy people. Marcus Aurelius was literally running an empire and fighting wars. He didn't have hours to spend on philosophical journaling, but he made time for this practice because he knew it was essential. If he could do it while leading Rome, you can do it in your ordinary life. It's not about having time, it's about making time for what matters. Some people find it helpful to write down their evening review, either in a journal or on their phone. There's something about writing that creates clarity and commitment. When you write down that you procrastinated on a particular task because you were afraid of criticism, it's harder to deny or forget. When you write down that tomorrow you'll take a specific action, you're more likely to follow through. But writing isn't required. The essential thing is the honest reflection, the clear-eyed assessment, the specific commitment to do something different. Over weeks and months of this practice, you'll start to see real change. Not because you suddenly become a different person, but because you're consistently bringing awareness to your patterns and making small adjustments. You're catching yourself procrastinating earlier, you're seeing through your excuses more quickly, You're following through on your commitments more often, and on the days when you don't follow through, when you fall back into old patterns, you're learning from it rather than just feeling guilty about it. You're treating each day as data, as information about what works and what doesn't, about where you're strong and where you need more support. The evening review ritual also helps you develop compassion for yourself. When you practice honest assessment without harsh judgment, when you look at your failures and your avoidance and simply note them as facts rather than evidence of your worthlessness, you start to relate to yourself differently. You see that you're human, imperfect, learning. You see that procrastination isn't a moral failing but a habit, a pattern, something that can be changed with patience and practice. This compassionate honesty is much more effective than harsh self-criticism. The Stoics understood that beating yourself up doesn't create change. It just creates more suffering, which often leads to more avoidance. But honest assessment combined with compassion creates the space for real growth. The sixth ritual might seem counterintuitive at first, but it's one of the most powerful practices in the Stoic toolkit for overcoming procrastination. This is premeditatio malorum, which translates as the premeditation of evils or negative visualization. The practice involves deliberately imagining things going wrong, obstacles arising, and plans falling apart. At first glance, this might seem like a recipe for anxiety and more procrastination, not less. Why would you want to focus on everything that could go wrong? Isn't that just feeding fear? But the Stoics understood something subtle and profound about how fear actually works. Fear thrives in vagueness, in the unknown, in the monster you won't look at directly. When you refuse to think about what might go wrong, those fears don't disappear. They lurk in your unconscious, creating a general sense of dread that fuels procrastination. But when you bring those fears into the light, when you examine them explicitly, they lose much of their power. Premeditatio malorum works by inoculating you against the very obstacles that would otherwise stop you. Think of it like a vaccine, where you're exposed to a small, controlled dose of a threat in order to build immunity. When you deliberately imagine encountering obstacles, and more importantly, when you imagine yourself handling those obstacles with wisdom and resilience, you're training your mind to see challenges as normal and manageable rather than as catastrophic. This makes you much more likely to act despite obstacles and much less likely to procrastinate out of fear of what might go wrong. Here's how to practice this ritual specifically for overcoming procrastination. Let's say there's a task you've been avoiding. Maybe it's starting a creative project, having a difficult conversation, or making a significant life change. You've been procrastinating, telling yourself you'll do it later, when conditions are better, when you feel more ready. The premeditatio malorum ritual asks you to sit down and explicitly imagine all the ways this task could go wrong. What's the worst that could happen? Write it down or think through it carefully. Maybe you'll fail publicly. Maybe people will criticize you. Maybe you'll discover you're not as good at this as you hoped. Maybe it will be harder than you expected. Maybe you'll encounter obstacles you can't overcome. List them all. Don't hold back. This isn't about being negative. It's about being realistic, about acknowledging that yes, things might not go perfectly. But here's the crucial second part of the ritual. After you've imagined what could go wrong, you then imagine yourself handling it. Not perfectly, not heroically, just adequately. You imagine that yes, people criticize your work, and you handle it by remembering that criticism is inevitable when you create anything, that it's not a referendum on your worth as a person, that you can learn from valid criticism and ignore invalid criticism. You imagine that yes, the task is harder than expected, and you handle it by breaking it into smaller steps, by asking for help, by being patient with yourself. You imagine that yes, you might fail, and you handle it by recognizing that failure is information, that it tells you something about what doesn't work, so you can try something different. What you're doing through this practice is proving to yourself that even if things go wrong, you'll be okay. You'll handle it. It might not be fun, it might not be easy, but you have the resources to cope. The Stoics believed that most of what we fear isn't actually as terrible as we imagine, and even when genuinely difficult things happen, we're more resilient than we give ourselves credit for. Epictetus, who endured slavery, physical disability, and exile, taught that nothing truly terrible can happen to someone who maintains their inner virtue. External circumstances might be unpleasant, but they can't destroy you unless you let them. When you practice premeditatio malorum, you're training yourself to see obstacles as Epictetus saw them, as opportunities to practice virtue, as chances to discover your own strength. This ritual is especially powerful for perfectionism-driven procrastination. If you're avoiding something because you're terrified it won't be perfect, premeditatio malorum asks you to imagine it being imperfect, and then imagine yourself being okay with that. You imagine completing the project but having it be flawed. You imagine sending the email with a typo. You imagine the presentation going well but not brilliantly, and you practice accepting that outcome, finding peace with it, recognizing that imperfect action is infinitely more valuable than perfect inaction. This doesn't mean you don't care about quality. It means you recognize that the pursuit of perfection often becomes a sophisticated form of avoidance. The Stoics also used this practice to prepare for genuinely difficult situations. Marcus Aurelius would imagine his plans failing, his health deteriorating, people betraying him. Not because he was pessimistic, but because he wanted to be prepared. He wanted to have already thought through how he would respond, what principles he would hold to, how he would maintain his equanimity and virtue regardless of circumstances. This preparation meant that when difficulties actually arose, he wasn't caught off guard. He didn't spiral into panic or despair. He simply enacted the responses he'd already rehearsed mentally. You can use this same approach with procrastination. Before you attempt a task you've been avoiding, spend a few minutes imagining obstacles that might arise and how you'll handle them. You're writing and hit a block where you don't know what to say next. You imagine yourself sitting with that discomfort instead of immediately fleeing to distraction. You imagine yourself writing badly, writing anything just to keep moving. You're exercising and feel tired and want to quit. You imagine yourself acknowledging the discomfort and continuing anyway, not because you're superhuman, but because you've decided that following through matters more than comfort in that moment. You're having a difficult conversation and the other person gets defensive. You imagine yourself staying calm, speaking honestly, not taking their reaction personally. This mental rehearsal creates neural pathways that make the actual experience easier. Your brain has, in a sense, already been there, already dealt with the obstacle, already proven that you can handle it. This is why athletes visualize their performances, imagining both success and potential problems. They're not just thinking positive thoughts, they're preparing their nervous systems to stay calm and focused under pressure. You can do the same thing with tasks you've been procrastinating on. You can mentally inoculate yourself against the fears and obstacles that would otherwise stop you. There's also a paradoxical effect of this practice. When you deliberately imagine worst-case scenarios, you often discover that even the worst case isn't actually that bad. Yes, maybe people will criticize your work. And then what? You'll feel bad for a while, and then life will continue. You'll learn something. You'll try again. The world won't end. Your worth as a person won't evaporate. When you follow the worst case through to its actual conclusion, you usually find that it's survivable, maybe even bearable. And once you realize that even the worst outcome won't destroy you, the fear loses its paralyzing power. You can act despite the fear because you've already accepted that yes, things might go badly, and even if they do, you'll handle it. Seneca wrote about this practice extensively. He recommended regularly imagining loss, failure, death, not to make yourself miserable, but to prepare yourself mentally and emotionally. He believed that most suffering comes from being unprepared, from being shocked by difficulties that are actually quite normal and predictable. When you've imagined difficulties in advance, when you've accepted their possibility and rehearsed your response, you're no longer surprised or overwhelmed when they actually occur. You're ready. This readiness translates directly into reduced procrastination, because so much procrastination is about avoiding potential difficulty. When you've made friends with difficulty, when you've accepted it as a normal part of any worthwhile endeavor, you stop needing to avoid it. You can move toward your goals even though you know obstacles will arise, because you've already decided that obstacles won't stop you. A practical way to integrate this ritual into your life is to practice it before any significant task or challenge. You're about to start a project you've been putting off. 5 minutes imagining what could go wrong and how you'll handle it. You're about to have a conversation you've been avoiding. Visualize it going badly and visualize yourself maintaining your composure and integrity regardless. You're about to take a risk you've been hesitating over. Imagine failing and imagine yourself learning from that failure and trying again. This brief preparation time is an investment that pays enormous dividends. It's the difference between going into challenges blind and reactive versus going in prepared and proactive. The Stoics also balanced premeditatio malorum with gratitude practices, imagining not just what could go wrong, but also appreciating what's going right. This balance is important. You don't want to become so focused on potential problems that you develop a genuinely pessimistic or anxious outlook. The point isn't to expect the worst, it's to be prepared for difficulties while still hoping for and working toward the best. Marcus Aurelius practiced this balance beautifully, reminding himself both of all the things he was grateful for and all the ways things could deteriorate. This kept him grounded in reality, neither naive nor despairing, just clear-eyed and prepared. As you practice this ritual, notice what fears come up repeatedly. If you're always imagining the same worst-case scenario, that's valuable information. Maybe that particular fear is one you need to address more directly, either by developing specific skills or by examining whether the fear is rational. Sometimes our fears point to real skills gaps that we can address through learning or practice. Other times, they're irrational stories we've been telling ourselves that need to be questioned and dismantled. Either way, the premeditatio malorum ritual helps you see your fears clearly, which is the first step toward either preparing for real risks or releasing imaginary ones. The seventh ritual addresses one of the sneakiest forms of procrastination, which is waiting for motivation before taking action. This is the ritual of the discipline of action over feeling, and it's based on a fundamental Stoic insight that most people have backwards. We think motivation leads to action. We think we need to feel inspired, energized, ready before we can move forward on important tasks. But the Stoics understood that the arrow of causation actually goes the other direction. Action creates motivation, not the other way around. When you act, even without feeling like it, the feeling often follows. But when you wait for the feeling before acting, you can wait forever. This is a discipline, which means it's something you practice regardless of how you feel. Not because feelings don't matter, but because you recognize that feelings are unreliable guides for important decisions. Marcus Aurelius struggled with this, which is why he wrote about it so much in his private journals. He would wake up some mornings not wanting to face the day, not feeling motivated to handle the responsibilities of empire, and he would remind himself that feelings are just feelings, that they pass like weather, that what matters is not how you feel but what you do. He wrote that at dawn, when you're reluctant to get up, remind yourself that you're rising to do human work. Even if you're tired, even if the bed is comfortable, you have purposes to fulfill. This is the discipline of action over feeling. You don't wait to feel like doing what's important. You recognize what's important, and you do it, regardless of feeling. This ritual is practiced in moments of resistance, those moments when you know what you should do but don't feel like doing it. In that moment, you practice a simple two-step process. First, you acknowledge the feeling without judgment. You notice that you don't feel like working on your project, you don't feel like having that conversation, you don't feel like tackling that task. You don't shame yourself for the feeling. You don't try to talk yourself into feeling differently. You just notice, oh, there's resistance, there's the feeling of not wanting to do this. This acknowledgement is important because it prevents the feeling from controlling you unconsciously. You're seeing it clearly, naming it, taking away its power to operate in the shadows. The second step is to act anyway, not in some huge, heroic way, just the next small action. You open the document even though you don't feel like writing. You pick up the phone even though you don't feel like having the conversation. You put on your workout clothes even though you don't feel like exercising. You're not trying to do the whole task. You're just doing the next immediate action, regardless of feeling. And here's what the Stoics discovered through practice. When you take that first action, something shifts. The resistance often decreases. The feeling starts to change. Not always, not magically, but often enough that the principle proves true. Action creates its own momentum. Motivation follows action more reliably than action follows motivation. This is such a crucial insight for overcoming procrastination because most procrastination is really just waiting for a feeling that never comes. You wait to feel motivated, you wait to feel confident, you wait to feel ready, inspired, clear, energized, and while you're waiting, time passes, opportunities close, projects remain unfinished. Dreams stay dreams. The Stoics would say you're giving your power away to your emotions, letting temporary feelings determine whether you live in alignment with your values. And emotions, by their nature, are temporary and changeable. They're not a stable foundation for important decisions. Epictetus taught this principle to his students constantly. He told them that they were confusing what was in their control with what wasn't. You don't control how you feel in any given moment. Feelings arise based on complex factors, many of them outside your conscious awareness. Your sleep quality, your blood sugar, your stress level, your recent experiences, all of these influence your emotional state. You can't just decide to feel motivated and have it be so, but you absolutely can decide to act regardless of how you feel. That's entirely within your control. And when you understand this distinction clearly, you stop waiting for feelings to give you permission to act. This doesn't mean you ignore your feelings entirely, or that you become some kind of robot just grinding through tasks. The Stoics weren't advocating for emotional suppression. They were advocating for emotional awareness combined with rational choice. You feel your feelings fully. You acknowledge them, honor them, give them space. But you don't let them be the ultimate authority on your actions. You let your values, your commitments, your understanding of what matters be the ultimate authority. Your feelings are valuable data. They tell you something about your state, your needs, your perceptions. But they're not commands. You can feel unmotivated and still choose to act. You can feel afraid and still choose to be brave. You can feel resistant and still choose to move forward. In practical terms, this ritual means you stop negotiating with yourself. Procrastination often involves elaborate internal negotiations. Should I work on this now or later? Do I really need to do this today? Can I wait until I'm in a better mood, a better state, a better situation? These negotiations are exhausting, and they rarely lead to action. They just drain your energy in deciding whether to act, energy that could be used for actually acting. The discipline of action over feeling cuts through all that negotiation. You've already decided what's important. You've already committed to certain values and goals. Now you just act on those commitments, regardless of momentary feeling. This is actually deeply restful because it removes the constant internal debate. The Stoics talked about cultivating what they called ataraxia, a kind of inner calm that comes from aligning your actions with your principles. When you're constantly negotiating with yourself, constantly debating whether to follow through on your commitments based on how you feel in the moment, you create internal chaos. But when you practice the discipline of action over feeling, when you simply do what you've decided is important regardless of emotional weather, you create internal coherence. Your actions match your values. You become someone who does what they say they'll do. And this creates a deep sense of peace and self-respect that's much more satisfying than any temporary comfort gained from avoiding difficult tasks. This ritual is especially important for creative work and any task that requires sustained effort over time. Creativity doesn't wait for inspiration. Professional creatives, the ones who actually produce work rather than just dreaming about it, understand this. They show up to write, to paint, to compose, to create, regardless of whether they feel inspired. They've learned that inspiration is more likely to visit when you're already working than when you're waiting around for it. The same principle applies to any important work. You don't wait for the perfect mood or the perfect moment. You show up consistently, you do the work, and over time, the cumulative effect of that consistency creates remarkable results. Seneca wrote about this in his letters, describing how the wise person maintains consistency of action regardless of external or internal circumstances. The weather of life is always changing. Some days you feel good, some days you feel bad. Some days circumstances are favourable, some days they're challenging. But underneath all that change, there's your commitment to virtue, to acting in alignment with what's important. And that commitment doesn't change based on circumstances or feelings. It's the stable foundation that allows you to act effectively in any condition. This is true freedom, not being controlled by the ups and downs of emotion and circumstance, but being guided by principle and commitment. One way to strengthen this discipline is to practice it with small things first. You don't have to start with your biggest, most intimidating task. Start with something small. You don't feel like making your bed. Notice the feeling, then make your bed anyway. You don't feel like washing the dishes. Notice the feeling, then wash the dishes anyway. These small acts of acting despite feeling are practice for the bigger acts. You're training the part of your brain that can override emotional resistance in service of what you've decided matters. Over time, this capacity strengthens. It becomes easier to act regardless of feeling because you've proven to yourself repeatedly that you can do it. The Stoics would also remind you that this discipline becomes easier when you're clear about your why, about why you're doing what you're doing. When you deeply understand why a task matters, why it aligns with your values, why it's worth doing even when it's difficult, it becomes easier to act despite not feeling like it. This is why the morning reflection ritual and this ritual works so well together. In the morning, you clarify what matters and why. Throughout the day, you act on that clarity, regardless of feeling. The morning provides the direction, the discipline provides the follow-through. As you practice this ritual, be patient with yourself. You won't always succeed. There will be times when the feeling is so strong that you can't override it, when you do give in to procrastination despite your best intentions. That's okay. That's part of being human. The Stoics didn't expect perfection. They expected honest effort and continuous practice. When you fall short, you don't collapse into self-judgment. You simply note it in your evening review, learn what you can from it, and commit to trying again tomorrow. Each attempt, whether successful or not, is practice. Each moment you choose action over feeling, you strengthen that capacity. And over time, the cumulative effect is profound. You become someone who can act on what matters, regardless of how you feel in the moment. And that capacity is one of the most valuable things you can develop. The eighth ritual might seem similar to premeditatio malorum, but it works in a different direction and serves a different purpose. This is the practice of negative visualization, as it applies specifically to time and opportunity. The Stoics, particularly Seneca and Marcus Aurelius, regularly practiced imagining they no longer had access to the opportunities, abilities, and relationships they currently possess. They would imagine losing their health, their position, their loved ones, not to torture themselves, but to fully appreciate what they have while they have it, and to create urgency about using their opportunities before they disappear. When applied to procrastination, this practice becomes a powerful antidote to the perpetual postponement that keeps you from living fully. The ritual works like this. When you find yourself procrastinating on something important, when you're telling yourself you'll do it later, you pause and imagine that later isn't available. Imagine that this opportunity has an expiration date and it's approaching much faster than you think. Maybe this chance to start your business, to learn this skill, to have this conversation, to create this thing. Maybe you only have this one window. What if your health deteriorates next year and you no longer have the energy? What if circumstances change and the opportunity closes? What if the person you need to talk to moves away or passes away? What if your own death comes sooner than expected? This isn't about creating anxiety. It's about creating realistic awareness of the fact that every opportunity actually does have an expiration date. Nothing is available forever. When you bring this awareness into your present moment, procrastination becomes much harder to justify. You can't tell yourself there will always be time later when you've genuinely confronted the reality that later might not come. You can't convince yourself that this opportunity will always be available when you've imagined it disappearing. The Stoics found that this practice created a kind of positive urgency, a feeling of now is the time, not because you're panicking, but because you're seeing clearly that now is actually all you ever have. Later is a concept, a story you tell yourself. Now is reality, and the opportunity that exists now might not exist later. Seneca wrote powerfully about this, observing how people waste their lives as though they have an infinite supply of time. They're generous with their time, careless with their opportunities, always assuming there will be more chances, more years, more moments. And then, suddenly, they're old or dying, and they realize with horror how much they wasted, how many opportunities they let slip by while they were waiting for some better moment. Seneca's solution was to live with the awareness that every moment is precious and finite, that every opportunity is temporary, that your ability to act is a gift you won't always have. This awareness doesn't create stress, it creates appreciation and motivation. It makes you want to use your time well, to act on what matters, to stop putting off what's important. Marcus Aurelius practiced a specific version of this with relationships. He would remind himself that everyone he loved would die, possibly soon, possibly before him. He would imagine his last conversation with his wife, his children, his friends. What would he want to have said to them? What would he regret not expressing? This practice made him more present in his relationships, more willing to express love and appreciation, less likely to put off meaningful connection. You can apply this same principle to the relationships in your own life. If you're procrastinating on having an important conversation with someone you care about, imagine that this might be your last chance. Imagine they die tomorrow and you never got to say what you wanted to say. How would you feel? What would you regret? This isn't morbid, it's realistic. People do die unexpectedly. Relationships do end without warning. When you let this reality inform your choices, you stop taking your relationships for granted. You stop assuming there will always be time to say what needs to be said. The same principle applies to your own abilities and energy. If you're procrastinating on a creative project, imagine that you only have your current health and energy for a limited time. What if in 5 years you're dealing with a chronic illness that makes creative work much harder? What if an accident limits your mobility? What if your cognitive sharpness declines? These aren't pleasant thoughts, but they're realistic possibilities. Your current capacity is a temporary gift. You won't always have the energy, health, and time you have now. When you really let yourself feel this, when you imagine looking back from diminished capacity and wishing you had used your full capacity when you had it, procrastination starts to feel like a betrayal of yourself. You're squandering a gift that you won't always have. This practice also works well for career and creative opportunities. If you're putting off starting a business, applying for a position, creating a project, imagine that this window of opportunity closes, markets change, industries evolve, your own life circumstances shift. The opportunity that exists right now might not exist in a year or 5 years. Are you okay with letting it pass by? Are you okay with looking back and wondering what might have been if you had acted when you had the chance? Often, when you confront these questions honestly, the answer is no. You're not okay with that. And that recognition creates motivation to act now, while the opportunity still exists. The Stoics would pair this negative visualization with positive action. You don't just imagine losing opportunities. You use that imagination as fuel to seize the opportunities you currently have. You imagine your death, and then you act with the urgency that comes from knowing you won't live forever. You imagine losing your abilities, and then you use those abilities fully while you still have them. You imagine opportunities closing, and then you walk through the doors that are currently open. The visualization isn't an end in itself. It's a tool for creating the clarity and motivation that lead to aligned action. There's a beautiful practice the Stoics did each morning called memento vivere, remember to live, which was the complement to memento mori, remember death. They would remind themselves both that they would die, and that therefore they should live fully while they're alive. This dual awareness of mortality and of life creates the perfect condition for overcoming procrastination, because procrastination is really a form of not living fully. It's putting life on hold, waiting for some future moment to really engage, really try, really show up. But when you practice memento vivere and memento mori together, you realize that this moment right now is your life. Not preparing for life, not waiting for life to start, but actually living. And if you're alive, if you're here, if you have opportunities, then the question becomes, why would you wait to engage with them? What are you waiting for? This ritual is especially powerful when you're procrastinating out of fear of wasting time or energy on the wrong thing. You're paralyzed by the thought that maybe this isn't the right project, the right relationship, the right path. Maybe you should wait until you're more certain. But the negative visualization cuts through this paralysis, because what's the alternative? To wait indefinitely for perfect certainty that never comes, to let all opportunities pass because you're afraid of choosing the wrong one. When you imagine reaching the end of your life having tried nothing because you were afraid of wasting time on wrong things, you realize that inaction is its own form of waste. At least if you choose something and it turns out to be wrong, you've learned something. You've lived, you've tried, you've engaged. But if you choose nothing out of fear, you've gained nothing. The Stoics had a concept called amor fati, love of fate, which included accepting that you won't always make perfect choices. You'll pursue some things that don't work out. You'll invest in some opportunities that don't pan out. And that's okay. That's part of being human, part of living a full life. The alternative, trying to avoid all mistakes by never fully committing to anything, is a kind of living death. It's being so afraid of wasting your life that you end up wasting it through fearful inaction. When you practice negative visualization, when you imagine truly running out of time and opportunity, you realize that imperfect action is infinitely preferable to perfect inaction. As you practice this ritual, do it with the same balance you used in premeditatio malorum. Yes, imagine loss and limitation, but then turn that awareness into appreciation and action. Imagine not being able to pursue your creative work anymore, and then feel gratitude that you currently can, and then actually do some creative work. Imagine the important conversation never happening and then feel grateful you still have the chance and then have the conversation. The visualization isn't meant to leave you in a state of anxiety or dread. It's meant to wake you up to the preciousness of your current opportunities and then mobilize you to actually use them. Seneca had a practice of ending each day by asking himself, have I lived today? Not did I accomplish a lot, not was I productive, but did I actually live? Did I engage with what matters? Did I use my time as though it were precious? Did I act on my values? Did I show up fully for the people I love and the work I care about? Or did I sleepwalk through the day, putting everything off, waiting for some better moment? When you ask yourself this question honestly at the end of each day, when you use negative visualization to see clearly that your days are limited and precious, you create powerful motivation to choose differently tomorrow. You stop treating your life as an infinite resource to be carelessly spent. You start treating it as the finite, precious gift it actually is. The ninth and final ritual brings together everything we've explored and adds one essential element that the Stoics considered foundational to all lasting change. This is the ritual of virtue and consistency, and it's based on the understanding that overcoming procrastination isn't really about productivity techniques or motivation tricks. It's about character. It's about becoming the kind of person who acts in alignment with their values regardless of circumstances. The Stoics believed that virtue, which they defined as excellence of character, was the only thing truly within your control and the only thing that led to lasting fulfillment. And they believed that virtue was developed through consistent practice, through small daily choices that, over time, shape who you are. This final ritual asks you to reframe your entire relationship with procrastination and action. Instead of seeing it as a battle between laziness and willpower, you see it as a question of character and identity. Who are you becoming through your daily choices? When you procrastinate, you're not just delaying a task. You're practicing being someone who doesn't follow through, someone who lets fear or discomfort make their decisions, someone who lives beneath their values. When you act despite resistance, you're not just completing a task. You're practicing being someone who honors their commitments, someone who acts with courage, someone who lives in alignment with what matters. This shift in perspective is profound because it makes every small choice meaningful. Every moment of choosing action over avoidance becomes a moment of character development. The Stoics identified 4 cardinal virtues: wisdom, courage, justice, and temperance. Each of these relates directly to overcoming procrastination. Wisdom is about seeing clearly what actually matters, distinguishing between what's essential and what's trivial, between what's in your control and what isn't. When you practice the morning reflection, when you identify what truly matters for your day, you're practicing wisdom. Courage is about acting despite fear, about facing discomfort rather than avoiding it, about being willing to risk failure or judgment in service of what you value. Every time you act on an important task despite not feeling ready, you're practicing courage. Justice, in the Stoic sense, is about fulfilling your role in the larger community, about contributing your gifts, about being reliable and showing up for others. When you overcome procrastination on work that serves others, when you have difficult conversations that need to be had, when you follow through on commitments you've made, you're practicing justice. Temperance is about self-regulation, about not being controlled by impulses and cravings, about maintaining balance and discipline. When you practice acting despite feeling, when you resist the urge to distract yourself with easy pleasures and instead do what's difficult but important, you're practicing temperance. Understanding procrastination through this lens of virtue transforms it from a problem to be solved into an opportunity for character development. You're not just trying to get things done, you're trying to become someone, specifically someone who embodies these virtues more fully. This gives deeper meaning to your daily struggles with resistance and avoidance. It's not just about productivity, it's about who you're becoming, and that transformation happens through consistency. One day of acting with virtue doesn't make you virtuous, but practicing virtue consistently day after day, choosing aligned action repeatedly despite resistance, that creates lasting character change. This is why the Stoics emphasized daily practice so much. Marcus Aurelius practiced his morning meditation every single day. Seneca did his evening review every night. Epictetus taught his students to practice their principles in every small interaction and decision. They understood that virtue isn't something you decide to have one day. It's something you practice into being through countless small choices. You become courageous by acting courageously repeatedly. You become wise by choosing wisely over and over. You become disciplined through consistent practice of discipline. There's no shortcut. There's just the daily work of choosing who you want to be and then practicing being that person through your actions. The ninth ritual, then, is a daily recommitment to this practice. Each morning, as part of your reflection, you remind yourself that today is another opportunity to practice virtue, to become more fully who you want to be. You remind yourself that every task, every moment of resistance, every opportunity to choose action or avoidance is also an opportunity to practice character. You're not just trying to overcome procrastination, you're trying to become someone for whom procrastination is increasingly foreign, someone whose default is aligned action because that's who they've practiced being. And then, throughout the day, you practice. Not perfectly. The Stoics never expected perfection, they expected honest effort and gradual improvement. When you face a moment of resistance, when you feel the pull of procrastination, you remember that this is a character-building moment. This is where you either practice being who you want to be, or you practice being who you're trying to outgrow. And you make your choice, knowing that this one choice might seem small, but it's actually shaping your character, adding to the accumulation of choices that determine who you become. In the evening, you review not just what you did or didn't do, but who you were. Did you act with courage today? Did you make wise choices about where to focus your energy? Did you show up for others in the ways you could? Did you practice self-discipline? Where did you embody your values and where did you fall short? This review isn't about judgment. It's about honest assessment in service of growth. You're tracking your character development, noticing patterns, celebrating progress, identifying areas that need more attention. The Stoics believed that this kind of consistent practice, sustained over years, creates profound transformation. You don't just overcome procrastination in some superficial way, where you white-knuckle your way through tasks you hate. You actually change who you are at a deep level. You become someone who values courage over comfort, wisdom over urgency, integrity over ease. And from that changed identity, aligned action flows naturally. You're not constantly fighting yourself, constantly overriding resistance through sheer willpower. You're acting from a place of clarity about who you are and what matters, and that makes everything easier. This is the Stoic promise, and it's a realistic one. Not that you'll become perfect, not that you'll never procrastinate again, not that everything will be easy, but that you can become someone who fundamentally relates to action and resistance differently, someone who sees clearly, acts courageously, lives consistently with their values, someone who, when they lie down at night, can honestly say they lived today, not perfectly, not without struggle, but with integrity, with commitment to what matters, with the kind of character that's built through thousands of small choices to act despite resistance. These 9 rituals work together as a complete system. The morning reflection creates clarity and intention. The dichotomy of control helps you focus only on what's actually within your power. Breaking tasks into present moments makes overwhelming things manageable. Memento mori creates healthy urgency. The evening review creates accountability and learning. Premeditatio malorum prepares you for obstacles. The discipline of action over feeling frees you from waiting for perfect conditions. Negative visualization helps you appreciate and seize current opportunities. And the focus on virtue and consistency ensures that all of this creates lasting character change, rather than just temporary behavior modification. You don't need to implement all 9 rituals perfectly from day one. Start with 1 or 2 that resonate most strongly. Practice them until they become natural. Then add another, then another. Give yourself time. The Stoics practiced these principles their entire lives. They were always works in progress, always learning, always refining their practice. You're joining a tradition that goes back thousands of years, a tradition of people who refused to be controlled by their circumstances or their emotions, who chose to live deliberately, who became more fully themselves through consistent practice. Procrastination has been stealing your time, your potential, your peace, but it doesn't have to anymore. Not because you'll suddenly become a different person, but because you now have tools, practices, rituals that address the actual root causes of procrastination. You understand that it's not about time management or motivation. It's about clarity, courage, discipline, wisdom. It's about character. And character can be developed. You can become someone who acts despite fear, who follows through despite resistance, who lives in alignment with what matters. Not overnight, not without struggle, But gradually, through consistent practice, through these 9 Stoic rituals applied daily, the ancient philosophers who developed these practices faced challenges you can barely imagine. Wars, plagues, betrayals, exile, slavery, loss. And yet they didn't just survive. They thrived. They found peace. They acted with virtue. They created works of wisdom that still speak to us across millennia. Not because they had it easier than you, but because they had practices that worked regardless of circumstances. Those same practices are now yours. Use them. Practice them. Let them transform not just your relationship with procrastination, but your entire relationship with life. Let them help you become someone who doesn't just talk about what they want to do, but actually does it. Someone who doesn't just dream, but acts. Someone who doesn't let fear or comfort or resistance make their decisions. Someone who lives fully, courageously in alignment with their deepest values. That person is who you're becoming, one choice at a time, one ritual at a time, one day at a time, and the time to begin is now, not tomorrow, not when you feel ready, now, because now is all you ever have, and it's enough.